Everything he'd left behind had become her problem, just like back when he left Denmark, leaving her mother alone with the funeral home on Bronsoy Square. "Where is he?" she'd asked. The question now echoed in her head. Lydia had known he was alive since before Ilka arrived in Racine, and for weeks she'd stood by watching Ilka struggle without saying a word until she was forced into it. For what felt like an eternity, they'd sat across from each other in silence while Ilka tried to calm herself down. "In Key West," Lydia finally answered. "Living in Artie's house," she added. "So Artie's known about it the whole time?" Ilka thought back to the night she'd spent in Artie's bed. He'd said nothing, even though she had opened up to him, exposed the part of herself that missed her father terribly. But Lydia shook her head. Artie had believed his friend and employer for the past 19 years was dead, that he'd died while Artie was up in Canada fishing. Lydia was the only one who knew the truth. She'd faked a death certificate by copying a signature from the many certificates the funeral home had handled, and she hadn't needed to ask Artie for a key to the house in Key West because she knew it hung on a hook in the prep room. Ilka had shaken her head in astonishment, but Lydia had refused to answer any more questions. "He helped me," was all she would say. Instead, she'd warned Ilka again that the men from her past would return, which was why it had been too dangerous for Ilka's father to stay in the funeral home, and she'd pleaded with Ilka, told her they had to get out of there too. None of this felt plausible to Ilka, and finally she'd stood up and announced that she was tired, she needed to think, and she was going to bed. Too much had happened. She wouldn't give in and agree to take off at once, even though the fear in Lydia's voice had made her skin crawl, on top of the shock of knowing her father was out there somewhere. She'd rolled into bed praying that all this would somehow disappear during the night, or at least not feel as horrifying when she woke up. But it was every bit as bad today. In fact, she'd half expected the sister would be gone when she woke up. The sister, Lydia, yelled up at her again. Ilka pulled on a sweater and buttoned her pants. Then she dragged out a weekend bag from under her father's bed. She jammed some clothes into it and grabbed her toiletry bag from the table. She had no idea how long it took to drive to Key West, but she was ready to go. Downstairs, Lydia had made coffee and put out crackers, a picture of normalcy that seemed absurd against the backdrop of Ilka's chaotic thoughts. But she took the cup that was handed to her. Her phone rang as she was about to sit down. The hospital. Ilka had added their number to her contacts list after Artie's admission. She sat down slowly and listened, ignoring the other woman as she stared at the table. "Okay," she said. "I understand. Of course you should do whatever can be done, absolutely." She swiped at her damp forehead as she spoke. After hanging up, she said, "The hospital needs the name of Artie's insurance company and the policy number, otherwise they won't keep treating him. And they need an okay from the insurance company or money in his patient account so they'll know they'll get paid." Ilka shook her head. Her thoughts were too foggy, she couldn't think straight. "How much is the bill?" Lydia asked. "Almost $50,000, and that's only for intensive care up to now." It sounded completely absurd to her. Artie was in a coma. What was the alternative if they stopped his treatment? Lydia stared straight ahead for a moment, then turned and walked out the back door. When she returned, she took out a thick wad of bills from the travel bag in her hand and gave it to Ilka. "Open a patient account for him, and tell them we'll be paying in cash until we clarify the situation with his insurance." Ilka stared, her eyes wide open at the thick bundle of $100 bills in her hand. But Lydia ignored her bewildered expression. Truth be told, Ilka didn't want to know where they came from. She didn't need any more loose ends or sketchy explanations. All she wanted was assurance that the doctors would take good care of Artie, and when she got it, she